Daniel Andrews, this apparent contradiction that we're seeing as to what was offered and when from the ADF in terms of troop support. It comes just a couple of days after the resignation of the Health Minister.
Well, Kieran, the Victorian government and the Victorian Premier have never satisfactorily answered these questions about the ADF. And we know, with documentary evidence, the details of the Morrison government's offers to Victoria at both the political and bureaucratic level to get ADF support. So all this does is this simply compounds the fact that we do not have satisfactory answers from the Victorian Premier. His performance at the inquiry on Friday was ignominious, and it is extraordinary that we now have a government that cannot explain itself and cannot explain its own ineptitude. And you would have thought that after the deaths of so many people, the hardship imposed on millions, the damage done to the Victorian economy, that we would have a leader in Victoria with the decency and sense of obligation to explain what happened. Well, we don't have that. Instead, we have the Health Minister quitting after the Premier held her accountable, but saying she disagreed with the evidence given by the Premier. So the situation is that we have a closed circle here in terms of the failure of the government and the failure of the Premier to properly explain to the people of Victoria what happened. In many ways, this is an unprecedented failure of governance and accountability.
Josh Frydenberg in the last week detailed the revised fiscal strategy ahead of the budget. How important was that in your view?
I think it was pretty critical. It's very unusual for the Treasurer to explain the fiscal strategy ahead of the budget, but there was a reason for this, and that is that the numbers in the budget are going to be so horrendous. He wants to ensure everybody ahead of time that the government does have a fiscal strategy. The key to this is there are two elements to it, Kieran. And the first is that the government will be committed to job creation and stimulus. The budget will have truckloads of Keynesian demand stimulus. It'll be a high spending, wage subsidy, personal income tax cutting budget with incentives for big business. So this is all about the stimulus phase, getting jobs back, getting activity back. And the government will only move to the second phase when unemployment is comfortably below 6%. And the second phase is focusing on the surplus and the task of fiscal consolidation, which of course has been the hitherto united approach of the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison governments. This is important politically because one can be fairly certain that unemployment won't be comfortably below 6% by the time of the next election. So the entire debate this parliamentary term is not going to be about the surplus, it's going to be about the stimulus, it's going to be about activity, it's going to be about jobs. So the budget will frame the political debate all the way to the next election.
On something else the Treasurer announced this week, some supply-side reforms, including adopting some of the Chapter 11 bankruptcy measures out of the US to enable small businesses to restructure their debt, for example. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I think quite important, Kieran, these two decisions. One related to the role of credit in recession, and that is changing the arrangements to ensure that banks are able to grant more loans to individuals and to businesses. And this followed a recommendation from the banks that they are too inhibited at the moment, and that's also the view of the Reserve Bank Governor. So the government needs to be a little bit careful here because it looks as though the government is back in league with the banks in order to provide credit. But the fact of the matter is that provision of credit in a recession is critical. The second point, as you raised, relates to insolvency, adopting some of the American measures here. This is a fundamental change in rules that have existed over the past 30 years. And the purpose is to enable small business to continue to operate when they're in trouble and give them a chance of trading their way out of difficulty. In other words, it's about giving a lifeline to small business. both important decisions.
And Paul, finally, as expected, Donald Trump has confirmed his nominee for the Supreme Court is Amy Coney Barrett. That was confirmed in the last hour.
We just saw a short time ago, Kieran, quite an historic and impressive speech by Amy Coney Barrett accepting the decision by the President to nominate her for the Supreme Court. She was assured, competent and very family orientated, which is hardly a surprise given she has 7 children. I think the optics of this, however, were very interesting. She was impressive, and it won't be easy for the Democrats in the Senate to campaign against her nomination, campaign against a Catholic woman being nominated and appointed to the Supreme Court. The significant point to make here is that it looks as though the Republicans have the numbers in the Senate, but she will be appointed. This will shift the Supreme Court 6-3 in terms of the Conservatives, and it will end up, if all that happens, being one of the most significant legacies of the Donald Trump presidency. It does create a problem for the Democrats and for Joe Biden, given the first debate comes up this week between Trump and Biden. Biden will be under a lot of pressure from his progressive base to campaign strongly against this nomination. But if he does that, what he risks is inflaming and energising Trump's base in terms of the Conservatives saying we've got every right to appoint such a woman to the court. So I think there's a long way to go here, not just in terms of the nomination, but in terms of the politics here in the presidential contest between Trump and Biden.
Paul, thanks as always. Talk to you soon.